So while the illegal mining saga rumbles on, the issue of thousands of abandoned mine shafts in the northwest is one that has not been dealt with. Despite government commitments, the progress of closing the shafts has been slow. For more on this, we are joined by Mametlwe Sebei, who's the president of the General Industries Workers Union of South Africa. Mr. Sebei, good to have you on the program this evening. Firstly, in your view, what are the primary reasons that abandoned mine shafts in the northwest remain a hotspot, especially for illegal mining activity?
Well, let's start here in Ndlandla. It is not unique to Northwest. As you would have seen, I was addressing the Convention of Mining Affected Communities in Limpopo. Many of those communities are facing a similar predicament. Leadership of that convention is from, Twickenham. That is a mine owned by Anglo, which has been under care and maintenance in 2016. Some, they were from Blue Ridge. It has been under care and maintenance in 2011. And you had, the mine around my area there that is called Bugona Platinum Mine that used to employ about 12,500 that was placed under care and maintenance. Now they're opening it with only a tiny fraction of the labor force that used to be employed there. I think at the moment they're employing less than 1,000 workers. So this is a national crisis. And this is a reason that from our point of view is that it has got to be tackled in a way that we say, how do we, make use of these abandoned mines, right? One is that it is the result of an institutionalized illegality by corporate mining companies that operate with impunity and flagrant disregard for the laws of this country, both in terms of their environmental management plans that include closure plans to ensure that holes are sealed, environment is properly rehabilitated so that it can be used alternatively for other productive purposes. And the other is lack of social investment in the upliftment of these communities, creating resilient communities that can transition to sustainable communities and local economies in a case of inevitable closures of the mines. So this is being allowed by a government that, it will tell you the 6,100 abandoned and derelict mine is a legacy of the past legislative framework, but it's a crime in progress. Between 2011 and 2016, even during this MPRDA period, 803 closure certificates were issued. Of those, only 27 were mining rights closure certificate. Of the 27, only 20 of them were in Western Cape, where there is no mineral for heavy mining that we know, the ones for coal, gold, platinum, and all of that, right? So the reality is that this abandonment is continuing. Most of these mines are placed under care and maintenance as, a prelude towards an abandonment that goes along with liquidations of the companies through which they are registered. Me and you will know about big companies like Anglo-American, Sibanye Gold, but what many people don't realize is that each of these mines will be registered as a separate company that actually owns the mine and is a subsidiary of the bigger companies. So that is how then they, get out of their responsibility by liquidating the company that actually owned the mine, and the bigger company remain a serial offender that then gets to be issued new licenses everywhere else.
Mr. Sebei, we do appreciate that context, but very interesting is that the government has committed to closing abandoned mine shafts, but also cites budget constraints. Do you believe this is a valid explanation, or is it a matter of mismanagement or misplaced priority here?
No, it's not supposed to be even government responsibility. Let's be clear about it. When you apply for a mining license, part of it is that you have got to show that you have financial provision, right, for rehabilitation of the mine throughout the life of the mine, but also at a point of closure. That money must be adjusted based on a regular environmental auditing of the requirement for rehabilitation, so that the amount is always adequate for the purpose of funding the rehabilitation and the closure requirements. That is not, the fact that is not happening, again, it speaks about the impunity of the big corporations that have monopolized mining in this country. But I think for me, we've got to say this. So there should be tens of billions of rands that are sitting in financial trust accounts, financial provisioning trust accounts, that should be now used to finance the rehabilitation, the proper closure of these mines. But reality is this, of the 6,100 of these mines, right, that are abandoned, that is derelict and ownerless, government said in the research that we did about 3-4 years ago that over 2,000 of them actually contain a substantial deposit of minerals that can still be, optimally mined. Now, what do we need to do with that? As the General Industries Association of South Africa, we have called for the opening of those mines on the basis of a government program to recapitalize these particular mines, and in the course of that, create the millions of jobs that we need to end unemployment and poverty that is devastating our communities in this country. Reality is that if you just think about it, I mean, if at least every of those mines can employ about 2,000 workers, right? That can easily translate into about 5 million jobs that we need. You apply or you use what we call the multiply effect, that can easily take you about 10 million. And of course, with the increased fiscus for government, you can take many of the unemployed young people that are of university going age to university, to colleges. That is how you can easily abolish unemployment. The idea that we are going to be sitting on the vast resources, mineral resources, without any plan, simply because there are no investors from Europe, from China, from Canada, Australia, wherever that they come from, that want to exploit the minerals with the cheapest labor, without investment in our communities, without any consideration of our environment on our lands. It's just outrageous for me. Government must lead, and it must be able to fund recapitalization program to ensure that these mines can be operated legally with regulation, but also safely, efficiently, and productively to ensure that they provide decent earnings for the workers as well as their families and communities, at the same time as they take the country out of a devastating levels of unemployment and poverty.
Mr. Sebei, what does the law say about this? I mean, mining companies are often accused of abandoning sites without proper rehabilitation. How effective are South Africa's laws in really holding companies accountable for these decommissioned mines?
In fact, the laws are very stringent, right? Government would want to actually to believe that before MPRDA, there were no strict requirements for rehabilitation for closure. That is hogwash. Reality is that this country have had laws requiring rehabilitation and closure for over 100 years. Going as far back as the Boer republics of Transvaal and Free State. What people need to understand, these were white farmer states, right? Primarily. And therefore, once industrial mining commenced in the late 19th century, from the onset, they had to take regulatory measures to protect their primary constituency, which were farmers. So from the beginning, regulations were developed, and those regulations were strengthened as the mining developed. The reason that you do not have that compliance is because, you see, beginning with an Anglo-Boer and the formation of South African Union of States at the behest of a British imperialism that intervened in the interest of the mining corporations, you have had a state that is essentially a mining capitalist state, that its whole political economic architecture is about managing the economy and society in the interest primarily of these mining capitalist corporations. And that is a reason that for this cooperation, impunity and lack of accountability and compliance with the law is a law itself, not an exception.
As we wind down our conversation, and also in your view, how do abandoned mines really affect the socio-economic conditions of these communities that we are speaking about? Are they seen as opportunities or liabilities?
Most of these communities are left worse off than even before mining. Let's understand what that means. Once it's a mining, and because what we have with the mining in this country is basically an industry that 100 years later, 30 years into democracy, it is still founded on the regime of accumulation by enslavement through what we call a cheap migrant black labor. Go to every mining town. It is not local community members that are employed in that particular mine. They employ everybody else except those local communities. That means, well, they bring, people without catering and infrastructure in terms of housing, in terms of number of other, things that the local communities simply do not have for additional population. Now, when these mining companies then abandon the mine, they simply abandon the miners, their families, those communities that are left with a housing crisis, with a crisis of infrastructure that simply cannot accommodate and service, the surplus population that are left out of the hostels and all those things and so on. And that's the reason that we have been calling for nationalization of the mining industry, because on the basis of the current private ownership that is monopolized by mainly foreign-owned multinational corporations, colonial mining with colonial extractivism, and cheap black migrant labor continue to be the foundation, we are not going to be able to build any sustainable community everywhere. And what you are seeing everywhere is a consequence and a devastating impact of that for communities that are left with these abandoned mines.
Mr. Sebei, thank you so much for your time. That's Giwusa Mametlwe Sebei giving us his perspective, of course, on the issue of decommissioned mines.